All right. Rasheed, how is it going over there?
It's good. It's a nice, Sunday morning, and the kids are up and at 'em, and everything's humming at this house. So it's good.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. I love that you're in Pasadena. My sister used to live in Altadena, so I spent a lot of time over there.
Oh yeah, no, it's lovely. It's incredibly suburban. When I was younger, I never would have thought that I would live on a leafy street with my husband and two kids, but I'm glad it happened. So here
There
we
you
are.
go. Leafy Street. I love it. How old are your kids?
5 and 7 on the verge. The 7-year-old's on the verge of turning 8.
Okay, I got you. That's about the same age difference of me and my sister. We went between buddies and just punching it out. So it was really
They're
fun.
they're pretty good. I mean, I will say, there are not too many silver linings to the pandemic. One of the minor ones
Yeah.
is that they became best friends because they just about spent 2 years being the only kids they could play with on a
Oh,
consistent basis. But I'd like to think they'll be close the rest of their lives, in part because they had so much concentrated time together.
oh, that's so awesome. What a good random, not even random, but a good perk to something that was so bad. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
we just would do things where, you'd see them begin to argue, and you go, guys, there's like, this is it. Like, you're best friends now.
Yeah,
So figure it out.
there you go. There you go. Well, Rashid, to start off our interview here, I'm going to ask you what I normally ask to start off, and that's just to describe the relationship that you have with your body.
It's changed over time. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm 43 now. I've always felt what I would call comfortable in my skin in general,
Mhm.
but there was certainly a peak in my late teens and into my 20s where I was athletic and very fit and felt very sexy easily. And so that was great. I mean, that was just, you really could wake up and put on a tank top and some shorts and go out into the world and feel it come alive. Um, Now I've hit the point where, you know, it hurts. The body hurts in the morning, and it takes effort. Like, I can still feel beautiful and sexy, but I'm out of my I woke up like this period.
Mm.
Um, and but yet I also I now I have a lot more compassion for my body. Like, it's certainly done me very well for a very long time. So if it can't do everything it used to do, that's okay. I give it those allowances. But generally speaking, I've always felt very comfortable in my own skin.
Mm. Oh, that's really awesome to hear that. I don't hear that often, hearing that you've always been really comfortable in your skin. So that's really cool. What how did you feel like that just kind of as a kid? Do you feel like you always had that mentality back then? Was there any kind of influence that helped you feel that way?
I think I was rather liked by my peers. So I got a lot of what we'll call positive affirmation. Um, I was a cute kid, which seems like a weird thing to say. Seems like
No,
a
it's a
strange thing to
good
say.
thing.
But people were typically very positive. Um, and there was sort of just that a lot of energy to burn when I was young, and my body luckily responded the way I wanted it to. Um, I don't know. And this sounds so silly. I don't think there's another human being who's gotten more mileage out of having dimples than me. You know.
I see them. I
Yeah,
see
right. And
them. They're
they
working.
and they're always working, and what no one tells you is they're evergreen. So, you can earn a six pack or something like that, but that's hard to maintain. Better to have features that just hold up over time.
Mm.
Eyes do it, cheekbones can do it, dimples do it. Um, so I've been sort of lucky that way. Um, I'm sure there were things I would have changed when I was younger. Now, things having so worked out as they have, I don't have that feeling so much. But I'm sure when I was younger, I wished I was a little taller. I wish probably that I had hair like other people I saw. But by and large, it's been a pretty happy story. The thing now is negotiating with what I will call decline. and unavoidable decline. For example, there was a time before my kids were born in my mid-30s, I was lifting weights and loving it, and eventually got to the point where that was unsustainable because I have benign positional vertigo.
Oh,
It comes and goes, which I should mention. Yeah, that probably has been the biggest betrayal of the body, is that
yeah.
suddenly, like, it doesn't respond and you can't do what you want to do. But
Mhm.
I was one of the annoying CrossFitters, and it just became impossible because snatching heavy weight above your head when you have a problem with your balance, it's not a great idea.
Mm-mm. Oh man, yeah. My dad had really bad vertigo, and I'm always like afraid I'm gonna have it because I feel like being nauseous is my least favorite feeling in the whole entire world. Is that how it felt to you?
It felt like the boat was rocking, and then at one
Yeah.
point I couldn't sit up without being sick.
Oh,
But it's also, again, it's this. I mean, like, what I've had to learn is, I think when I was younger, I could push through the pain, I could push through discomfort, I could push through fatigue.
mhm.
I don't do that anymore because the price is too high. But in my case, my vertigo is typically triggered by a consistent lack of sleep and pressure. And so I've just gotten to the point now where I'm like, well, I'm going to go to bed, and this other thing will get done when it gets done.
Mhm.
Because the penalty for not listening to my body is I'm on my back for 3 days, and then I'm really screwed. So I've had, I'd say, 2 bad bouts, but it's been almost probably 2 years since anything like that happened.
Mhm.
And I would credit that to me now. When I feel the boat rocking even a little bit, I get some more sleep. I I I I listen to my body.
Okay. That that's really that's special in a way. It's kind of like you've found this unique way that your body tells you, hey, pay attention to me. We need this. And I mean, it really, really sucks that vertigo is the
Yeah.
result in the other way of not listening. But that says a lot about, I feel like, your connection with yourself, that you've learned to listen to it. Did that, like, was it hard to come to get there?
Not by the time I got, I mean, like, I think I learned that I had lost a capacity. I mean, what happens is, when you're very young, you can function on maybe 4 hours of sleep several nights in a row,
Mhm.
or at least you feel you can. I would, you almost don't want to go back and grade your performance, but you can do it.
Yeah.
And we come to rely on that. We have these stressful jobs, we have these busy lives. And if well, I don't need quite as much sleep, and I can put the kids to bed, and then I can come up to the office and work through the night, you start to bank on it.
Mhm.
And it was true at one time, I could do that. What I've learned is I can't do that quite so much, if at all, anymore. um,
Mhm.
I just it's too damaging. And it's humbling. I mean, you don't love realizing that you've lost that ability, but it's also sort of, in my mind, it's non-negotiable. Like, there's no, now that I know that about myself, I wouldn't do it. It's like finding out you've got, like, a peanut allergy, where you're just not going to eat peanuts anymore.
Mhm.
Like, you're not going to attempt it.
Yeah.
um and it actually, the medical thing actually helps, because when if you talk to people that are sort of asking you to keep a crazy deadline, instead of saying, I won't do this just because I won't, because that people get upset and they question your dedication, you get to say, oh, well, I have this medical condition, and
Mhm.
if I do X, Y, Z, these bad things will happen. No one questions you after that.
Oh,
No one.
wow.
I mean, you've told them you've got a medical problem, and what are they going to say? We don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a nice thing to have, because it helps you hold a line that everyone else has to respect.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very, very good and important way of seeing it, because it's the truth.
Mhm.
It's the truth. And I think, like, I hear a lot of the time when people talk about like autoimmune stuff where it's kind of like an invisible illness where you feel horrible, and you know that if you push yourself more, you will end up sick. You will end up on your back, like you're saying.
Yeah.
But people around you can't see that. They just see you as a person. Like they don't see a broken leg or a broken arm. So it's really, really cool and important that you're able to just say that, like, no, I have an actual medical condition, and not to feel guilty or feel like in any way less than. I've heard a lot of people talk that way.
I present it as, this is better for everybody. TJ and I, my writing partner and I, are the co-showrunners of Bel Air. I could work all night and try to get you something, and it could trigger this in me, and I could be down for 3 to 4 days. Or I could go to bed tonight, I'll work on it tomorrow, and you'll get it a day later. The choice becomes so clear. Everybody just says, okay, well, we'll push it back and we'll get it a day later, as opposed to, no, go up there and let's trigger an event that incapacitates you for an unknown series of days.
Okay. That's awesome. That is an incredible way to put it, because that's the truth. And it's just saying it how it is. That's very cool. So Rasheed, tell me about your book, My Government Means to Kill Me. I found out about it by my favorite bookstore ever in St. Louis, called Left Bank Bookstore, posted about it.
Oh, great.
And anything that they post, I'm all about, because I don't know if have you heard of that bookstore? I'm not sure.
I've heard of it, but I haven't been there.
Okay, well, if you're ever in St. Louis, go to Left Bank. They made this whole, I'll send it to you on Instagram. They made a whole post about it. And I saw it, and the name got me, because I'm like, oh, that is something I want to read. Tell us about what that story is about, how you came to want to write it.
Absolutely. My Government Means to Kill Me is a novel. It follows the story of a young gay Black man who moves to New York City when he's 17, and it's 1985. So he's arrived during the height of the AIDS crisis. He doesn't know that yet. Initially, his concerns are really sort of young and, I'll say, selfish in a way. He's trying to figure out, where am I going to live? How am I going to earn money? How will I make friends? And where am I going to get laid? But as he begins to take care of those needs, he sees the bigger needs. And it's really the story of a young man's political and sexual awakening. He goes from being someone who's probably pretty myopic to being somebody who's an effective advocate.
Okay. Yeah, that is a really, really good way of explaining that book in a really short way. You must have worked on it.
Thank you. I've had some time to think about it.
Yeah, it's like, is that your elevator pitch?
That's it. That's the one. Just tell people real quick, here's what it is.
That's a great pitch. I'm like, wow, you've covered all of it in such a short, concise way. That's very cool. What gave you the inspiration to write this book?
I've been thinking about that time period. I'm about 10 years too young to have been of age during the height of the AIDS crisis. Like I was alive, but I was a child. But I've thought about that time period all my life, because you just sort of wonder what you would have done had I been alive then. I assume it's what a lot of people do if you're part of any sort of minority group. You go back to the time of the greatest struggle. I've thought, like, what would happen if I'd lived during the civil rights movement? My husband is Jewish and has wondered, well, what would I have done in the lead up and during the Holocaust? You just wonder how you would have met the moment that probably defined your community. And so I've mused about it a lot. And then when I decided I wanted to write a book about it, it turned out, I had to do some research, but it's almost like I've been studying the period my entire life. I had read all these books. I had seen all these documentaries and movies that really sort of gave me a lot of information to I want to say play off of, but I don't mean play in the in any sort of frivolous sense of the word, but it certainly gave me a lot to work with.
Okay, well, first off, high five to your husband. I'm Jewish too, so I love it. I love to see it. Yeah, that's really cool. That's really, That's a really, really well or good way of putting it. I was just watching this show, this new A League of Their Own show.
Oh
Have you
yeah.
heard of it? Yeah.
Oh
Have you?
yeah. I have friends who work on it. Yeah, it's a great show.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I grew up watching the movie. And so then when the show came out, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like a more realistic. Everyone's saying it's like, no, this is like really close to what actually happened. And I'm watching it, and me and my partner, who's a woman, are watching it, and we just both got so torn apart at the it was one of the last episodes where the bar got the police came into the bar, and it was just like all of a sudden this realization of how bad it had been, and like how it's bad now, but like back then, like, oh my gosh. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
that definitely puts you in a place of thinking, what would you do? So that's very interesting that you decided to, oh sorry, um to take that and write a whole story of it. I love it. What did you learn? What were some really big things you learned in your research of the AIDS crisis in that time period?
I mean, I like to think, you like to think that you can see through sort of the gloss of history, but it was surprising that the things that even I had taken for granted, that later I was like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, but of course, right? So I'll just start with like what we come to think of generally as the start of the AIDS crisis, which for most people, you imagine the early 80s.
Mhm.
The New York Times wrote the first story on it in 1981. But that's just when it reached the consciousness. That's just when it reached the consciousness of what we'll say is, the general population. Um, you look into it, people had been dying of AIDS into the 70s, in some cases into the 1960s.
Mm.
But our mind thinks it starts where there was this designation of it being recognized by the majority. And so that was something that was really sort of, I think in the book we looked up, and it was, I want to say 67 or 66. It's like the early known confirmed case of someone dying of AIDS in America. And it's just sort of mind boggling to be like, wait, it was in our country that long. It was killing people for that long. I mean, even now when you look at the AIDS quota, you think of that number, there's a dark side of the moon that we will never know. People
Mm.
who we lost before this had a name, before it was important enough for our society to keep track. So that probably is the most powerful one that just really took me back. It's like, oh, wait a minute. We actually don't even know when this began. We don't know when the start of the story is.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that reminds me of what you were saying. I think it was really early on in the book about how Trey was talking about how the main character for those listening, he was talking about how he wouldn't have really noticed if like I can't remember what he said, like his barber went missing or the bus
Yeah.
driver went missing. And it's just like, it doesn't really click if these people aren't these like big names or something.
Well, one of the things that, and it's really hard for people to imagine now, because now almost no one is lost. I mean, because of social media, if you went to summer camp with somebody in the fourth grade, you know exactly where they are now. They don't, no
Mhm.
one seems to just disappear off stage. But that used to be a big part of what happened. People moved and you never heard from them again. And you didn't know what happened to them. In big cities, the idea that people would move and it was a very transient population, that people washed out and there were new people who came in on the bus, meant that if you went to a club and the cute guy you liked wasn't there anymore, you just assumed he moved on. You
Mhm.
you didn't you didn't you didn't really investigate that in terms of like, oh my God, where did this guy go? But now what I think Trey is realizing is a lot of people were disappearing, and they were becoming, they had HIV, they had AIDS, and they were dying, and they went home to die. And that's another thing, is that we're talking about an era where people went home very sick and their family wouldn't tell anybody what was going on.
Mm.
So it seems, in writing it, I talked about it, I was like, I try to remind myself all the time that the characters don't know what's going to happen next. Like I say, oh, this book happens during the height of the AIDS crisis. Trey doesn't know that.
Mhm.
No one knows that yet, and
Yeah.
so it was important for me for them to keep a perspective that would have been real to what was going on. I mean, we all just lived through a pandemic. And I think you'll find if you talk to 20 people, they had 20 different moments where they understood this was real and this was serious and this was going to be unlike anything they've ever done. I remember when we were all trying to bend the curve and we thought, oh, we'll just go in our houses for a couple of weeks. And I had a friend who I was thinking, I think it's going to take more than a couple of weeks. And he goes, well, how long do you think you can expect people to do this? And I said, I don't know, maybe 3 months. And he was like, oh my God, we could never. And I mean, 3 months, I thought, both of us had no sense of what we were stepping into.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It feels so crazy to be talking about an example that literally is happening.
Yes.
Now.
Still going.
Oh my gosh. It just blows my mind sometimes. Not to bring up another TV show, but we were watching, have you watched The Morning Show?
By the way, I'm a fan of television. Most of my career is there. So
amazing. Then I'm going to go ahead and shamelessly bring up all the shows. The Morning Show. Have you watched that one?
I saw the pilot, but I didn't stick with it.
Okay, so in the second season, they're filming it as if it is happening in like real time in 2020. And so you're seeing like at the very beginning, there's like these little foreshadowing moments that they had no idea about, but like people sneezing in the background, or like all of a sudden you see in like the news headlines like Corona, and people are talking about how, oh no, don't worry about that. And it's just so, it feels like you're watching some kind of crazy science fiction movie, because you know what's going to happen because it happened, but then you remember, no, that is like true real life. It's so insane. And then because I think when we think, or at least when I think about like the AIDS crisis, it feels so long ago, but it wasn't.
No, in the lives of many of us, it was, and it was immediate, and it happened. It's sort of like it when it finally did catch public consciousness, it caught it so quickly, and the grip was so tight. I mean, as someone who was born in 1979, and so I'm in the shadow of what we'll call the peak. All of sex ed is dominated by discussion of AIDS.
Oh wow!
All of it. That is all. Like that's. I mean, I don't remember anybody mentioning the clap or gonorrhea or anything else. It was all under the headline of AIDS. And, in my case, going to Catholic school, AIDS was used as a sort of a way to scare everybody into the idea of abstinence. I mean, and again, and I safe sex, responsible sex, I'm all for it. The idea that two virgin gay teenagers in Indiana were going to give each other anything is laughable when you think about it. Like if you had a conversation about, your sexual experience, which is, I don't have any and you don't have any, the fear that they brought into the room would have evaporated. But, we just weren't having those conversations. We weren't able to see through sort of all the fear mongering that came with the aftermath of the height of the crisis.
Yeah. So how did that come off to you? Like, do you remember how old you were when you first learned about the AIDS crisis going on?
Ryan White was from Indiana. I'm from Indiana. Ryan White was a young, like a teenager who became HIV positive through a blood transfusion. He was a hemophiliac.
Oh gosh.
And they had given him this is before they tested the blood or knew to test the blood. And so he was HIV positive, and his local community responded in absolute fear. They didn't want him going to school with the other children. And he became, in those days, a celebrity. I don't know how many people under the age of 40 remember Ryan White, but he was an incredibly big deal at the time. Elton John made friends with him. Princess Diana, I want to say, met with him.
Wow.
And he died at a young age. I mean, maybe he was 16, maybe 17. And his funeral was like, they aired it on television. It was a major event. So that was probably the first time I had thought about it. And it was, of course, also frightening because he was a child and I was a child, and you're suddenly going, wait a minute, this can happen to us. But again, like you think about it, you're like, but I wasn't a hemophiliac and I wasn't getting blood transfusions. So I wasn't actually in danger. But I mean, I remember adults being like, see, it can happen to you. And you're just like, oh shit, I mean,
Oh shit.
there was a lot of, and as in most cases, when there's a public debate, there's a lot of fear and not enough reason. So that was probably the first time it came up. In high school, I remember my school arranged for a speaker. It was a man who was dying of AIDS to come and speak to the students. And I remember that like quite clearly. And in college, one of my best friends sort of introduced me to this foster home for children in DC who were HIV positive or living with AIDS. And I volunteered there while I was in college. And the year after I was out of college, I was a volunteer there for 5 years. So those are probably my early sort of interactions with the disease.
Okay, I got you. And then knowing what you know now, like all the research you did for the book and just being who you are in general, just life. When do you know what was the big thing that happened that made it this worldwide thing versus just how you were saying, like in the 60s and 70s, people were dying of it before we really knew about it? Like what changed that?
What changed that? I think certainly there was some reporting being done by the mainstream press, but I also I'd give a lot of credit to Gay Men's Health Crisis and ACT UP and the gay rights movement, which basically realized that, okay, wait a minute, this is really eating into our ranks at a way that they were the first people to start to notice, okay, wait, this is happening. Mm-hmm. And they concentrated a lot of attention, a lot of energy in engaging the media, mostly concentrated in New York, into paying attention and getting politicians to pay attention and say that word. So, again, in the sort of like milquetoast version of it, you could go, oh, well, Rock Hudson got AIDS and it was a Hollywood star and he was friends with President Reagan. Yeah, that brought a lot of eyeballs to it, but really it took these advocates who just kept tally and said 10,000 dead, 15,000 dead, 20,000 dead. When are we going to talk about this? When are we going to engage? When are you going to try to find a cure? What kind of protection is out there for us? And they dedicated it seems like it sort of popped onto the national consciousness, but that was after years and years of work by people who were making sure that drumbeat was finally heard.
Okay, so that was like a collective, we need to do something about this.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. Wow. And so you grew up in Indiana?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you grew up, so you're born in 79, so you were a kid during the 80s and all this was going on. When you did start to realize what was going on, if it was like after Ryan White or just you were learning, how did you feel as like about, like, did you feel afraid? Did you feel like what was that experience?
Oh yeah. I mean, I felt afraid and had been, and that was because that's the posture they wanted people in. They wanted, it's just like, we're going to scare you. Now, the argument would be, we were trying to save your life. Looking back, what would have been great is just introducing sort of more rational ways of conducting your sex life. Which is where we ultimately got to, was like, let's have a conversation. Have you been tested? When was the last time you were tested? Are you safe? This is what we're going to use. And we can go down there together and clear up any questions we might have about our health. At the time, it was just like, the idea was every time you have sex, you're gambling with your life, which again, could in some cases be true, but in a lot of cases with a really candid conversation would have you'd have realized there really was no danger. And also it made you presume, at least for my upbringing, that every sexual partner could potentially be lying to you and out to infect you and harm you. And it's not to say those things didn't happen, but that's a pretty dark way. I mean, you're trying to seek intimacy, and yet your presumption, you've been trained to look at this person as somebody who might knowingly infect you with a deadly disease. You know, that there's a lot of cognitive dissonance there that I think get in the way. And I think it wasn't necessary. I feel like essentially conservatives who wanted an abstinence agenda seized upon this as a way to sort of hammer that message home. So, you know, we had a whole generation or two raised to have a response that was not as nuanced as it needed to be. And ultimately, I think also, I mean, one of the unintended consequences, let's assume it was unattended, is it made you almost subconsciously think of people with HIV and AIDS as pariahs, as a danger to you. And probably stopped a lot of the compassion that should have been going in their direction.
Oh God. Oh, that like makes me feel sick.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, that was America.
Yeah, that was and is and oh my goodness.
And it always has been America. Yeah.
Yeah. So talking a lot about how they used that to promote abstinence and just not have sex. And you told me that when we first started talking here, you were saying that it was important to you in writing your book to make it very sex positive. Were you raised with like a sex positive mindset, or did that take a lot of undoing and work to kind of get there?
It's hard to answer because like certainly the messages like we're not sex positive.
Oh, for sure.
And the first times I remember having sex, I was incredibly afraid. But it's almost like finally realizing there is no boogeyman under the bed. You know, I remember one of the things people talked about, but this is the way it was. I was assured that having sex outside of marriage and with someone I wasn't in some deep, deep relationship with would leave me feeling hollow and empty after it was over.
Yeah.
And then I started having sex, and that never happened. I felt great. This was wonderful. When can we do it again? And so then you start going, well, wait a minute, if that was a lie, what else was a lie? And a lot of it turns out to be a lie. And that was really exciting and freeing to discover that, wait a minute, oh, okay. Like I'm not a bad person because I enjoy sex or can have it. And as long as I'm checking up on my health and having these conversations and taking these precautions, guys, I think I'm okay. And that was really wonderful to discover. I've wanted to tell a story during the height of the AIDS crisis that just spoke to some of the realities I've noticed in life, which is no matter how grim or frightening the present may be, people find a way to have joy, they find a way to laugh, and they find a way to have sex. And pretending that those things stop because you're trying to push another message is dishonest. And so I wanted to just reflect those things throughout the book. That of course people were still having sex, and there can be a little bit of cognitive dissonance. I mean, I'd be 19 years old and I'd be volunteering at grandma's house with kids who are HIV positive, and, you know, help them with their homework, dinner, bedtime stories, goodbye, leave at like 9:30, ride my bike to DuPont Circle, which is affectionately known as the Fruit Loop, and would lock my bike up and go to clubs and go out that night and, you know, have sex. And, you know, I
Have a
would
good
say,
time.
and I would say, by the way, I'd say a fair amount of the time it was protected sex, but certainly not all the time. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, oh, I've slept with him before, or I know him, or, you know, you would tell yourself you were safe and you take your chances.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just a part of that age, and that's a part of that reality. And I wanted to just, I felt it was my job as a writer to put all that in.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. I think that I when I read books that have so much truth in the way the stories are told like that, it gives me this feeling of just, it's like that right there, that is being an actual person. And it's so true, and it's so important in the way that you wrote that and the way that you're talking about it now, especially like just, I mean, I'm trying to imagine, I can't imagine what it was like, but like the thought of just knowing, like from my own background, which you said you went to Catholic school, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Were you like in the midst of all the purity culture and stuff back then? Was that a big
Oh yeah.
component?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So like my understanding of my own experience with that, and then trying to add on to that, like just homophobia in general, and then on top of that also this disease that can kill you, that is like just screamed from the rooftops now that it's because of having sex and that's going to kill you. And it's just, I can't imagine how hard that was to live a life where you were able to be sex positive, were able to enjoy yourself with partners and just be a person.
I for whatever, I don't know how to even describe my personality along this. You know, some people, they tell you the fence is electric, don't touch the electric fence.
Uh-huh.
And I understand that reasonable people would just never do that. I have something in me that says, well, let me just see if that's true. And I touch it a little bit. And then once you know that that's a lie, you can climb the fence and you can escape.
Ooh.
And that's my experience with a lot of institutions and a lot of rules. If you test it, you will find that it's just sort of it's just there to keep you in your place.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get over it, and again, like I don't think the first time I did that was with like sex, but the problem with a lot of conservative places, they've got so many rules, and so many of them are just sort of bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can tear through the smaller ones, you learn you can tear through the bigger ones as well.
Oh my God. I want to write that on something. That's awesome. That's so good. Talk to me more about what you learned when researching your book, but also in general about the government. And one of the chapters that really got me was when Trey was talking to those the rich old white guys at a party.
Yeah.
Yeah, and about that kind of brought him to go on rent strike, and just what that opened up for him, and what he learned as far as like why it was so difficult to figure out the name of his landlord. His landlord.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, we sort of, it's sort of funny. There are things that we just assume they have to be this way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the DMV is one, right? Like you just assume you're going to go down the DMV. It's going to be a nightmare and it's going to take all day. But with a lot of the things in government, what you're finding is they're not hard to access by accident.
Mm-hmm.
It's by design. It's meant to keep you away. It's meant to make sure you don't access these resources or ask these questions or receive this information. that's important to acknowledge, because once you understand that's the game that's being played, then you as a participant are better equipped to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
You realize they're trying to wear you down. I mean, I'll just give everyone, this is a small thing, but it's personal, but it's not in the book, but it's just the IRS, like every once in a while, if you ever get audited, they'll send you a threatening letter telling you owe them a lot of money. And if you don't pay them right now, the number will go up.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know, like you have to talk to you have to know you're right and that they've made a mistake, and let them keep threatening you until you get to the point where you can talk to somebody and have a resolution. I've had this happen 2 or 3 times. I mean, like in the end, they've had to pay me back. But the
Yes,
game is sent. I mean, what they're preying on is you're getting this thing from the IRS.
Yeah.
And we've said you've made a mistake. And I mean, and wouldn't we know? And and we're telling you the pain will increase if you challenge us. You have to remind yourself, it's just a letter.
Mm-hmm.
Probably just generated automatically. And if you're right, you're right. Wear them down. Stick with it. It's taken years in some cases to resolve these things. But I know that's the game. They're hoping that my fear of them will make me write them a check and stop the game. But if you know, you're gonna, at the end of this, I'm gonna win. Play it. And politics has a lot of that in it. I think one of the things I'm hoping that we're beginning to realize, and certainly they realized during the height of this book, was that it's not enough to just show up and vote in November.
Mm-hmm.
That we do a lot in between.
Yeah.
That's actually almost more important, or in a lot of cases makes November a foregone conclusion.
Uh-huh.
And so what I wanted in this book was for him, and the rent strike is one of them, is him beginning to realize, oh, this is how the game works when you want to gain something from the government.
Mm.
And you can cry about it, you can complain about it, or you could learn the rules and beat them at their own game. And that's what I wanted to show, his education of being like, oh, I mean, one of the things I love about ACT UP, when you really get into it and you look at them, is ACT UP would send out a press release saying, we're going to take over the CDC. We're going to take over this building today. We're going to, they didn't have the bodies to do that. They didn't have the numbers. They also, you don't want to get arrested, right? So ACT UP would start with that charge. They'd show up with a lot of people. They'd scale the wall. They'd put a huge sign outside. And from the news, if you looked at it with that banner hanging from the windows, it would look like they took over the building.
Oh my God.
They did not. But on the evening
God.
news, ACT UP protested the CDC today and seized the building. And look at that picture. There's a banner hanging from the windows and there are guys up on the, I mean, it looked like they mobbed it. They didn't get further than the lobby. But they understood how media works, and they understood how messaging works.
Mm-hmm.
And they use those to great advantage.
Oh my goodness. I have so many things I want to learn about. So many things. This is just, I only woke up to like the truth about politics and government stuff maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm still kind of a baby in that regards when it comes to learning about it. And I
think the book will help. I mean, and people know there are footnotes in this book that certainly, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, you could follow any of these footnotes into the people and the movements and the organizations that shaped the reality that Trey was living in, and in some cases continue to shape our reality. And I wanted the book to be this entree to those discussions and to that sort of discovery of politics, and that the myth making of politics almost never stops. And some of that is because, the truth is sort of hard and nuanced and unknowable, and it's just so nice to tidy it up. Mm-hmm. But I love sort of poking fun at that and busting through it. I mean, I was lucky. Bill Goldstein is the official biographer for Larry Kramer, and we were just talking about in the book, I sort of give this alternate history on how ACT UP got started. And it wasn't just, my thought is it wasn't just Larry Kramer making a speech that suddenly everybody said, let's do it. And Bill was like, my fictionalized version gets to a truth that often doesn't get said, which is, yes, Larry Kramer did give this great speech that basically said, let's start something like ACT UP. Except when you look at the 3 or 4 people who were pivotal to the creation of ACT UP, outside of Larry Kramer, almost none of them were at this speech. They weren't there that day. And the idea of an ACT UP-like organization had been floating around for years. So it wasn't like Larry woke up, that morning and the light bulb went off and he said, why, or he said something spontaneous that grew into this thing. But the lore loves that story. Mythology loves that simple story of the person who says, let's do something, and it sparks everyone into action. It galvanizes the crowd, and something powerful and wonderful comes out of it. But that, I want to say never happens, but almost never happens. Yet our minds are such that we fall for it again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I definitely, for those listening, definitely check out this book and read the footnotes and just read it. I'm so excited to get to talk to you about all of this. I don't know, like I said a second ago, I'm fairly new to opening my eyes and learning like the truth of what has happened and what will continue happening, and learning, like you said, that it's more about than what we just do in November. What are some practical things that you think we can be doing outside of voting in November to help make the right changes?
Some things, or I would say there's some things we can do that don't need the government's involvement. There are organizations that do direct action, help people. I always joke that there are 2 types of things you can do. One is sort of policy, and that's let's change the laws of the land. The other is direct action, which is like, how about you make a sandwich for someone who's hungry? How about you supply shelter for someone who's experiencing homelessness? So, and what I also argue is that people, it doesn't matter, just do something somewhere on that spectrum, get involved. I feel nothing wrong to encouraging people to write checks to support the work of organizations and candidates that they love and support. That also is a very necessary way to be an advocate. But what was great about ACT UP, and I just use them because I really do admire them, is what they were asking people to do, and what I want people to do, ask themselves now, where do your natural talents lie? Where do your natural inclinations lie? And follow them. So for example, there were people who worked for ACT UP who were, they created ads, they were creative directors. They put those skills into practice to create some of the signs and propaganda that ACT UP used to galvanize the country. So I'm always sort of like, if you like kids, do something with kids. If you like animals, do something with animals. Use whatever your natural skill set is to make the world better in a way that won't burn you out. I think a lot of times we have this idea of like, well, I've got to go to every protest. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody's able to make that walk and give that time. And there's something you can find, and that's really your responsibility to find out where and how you can be of use.
I love that. I love that you say something that won't burn you out, something that you already care about and are passionate about, because it feels like people talk about callings all the time, and I have different opinions on what that means, but just something that you're already passionate about, like you're saying, like animals are like kids, and then taking that and being like, that's my avenue to work. That's my avenue to change things. That's perfect.
I've known people who are, the great gardeners, and just go to the local park and say, okay, we're going to plant some things here. And you never know who's going to walk into that park at the end of their rope, so to speak, and take a deep breath and look at that garden and need it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but first someone's got to plant it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it all counts. I mean, in the book, I think, and this happens in life, there's often a lot of squabbling about what direction we should do. And, should we be doing direct action? Should we be doing politics? Do everything. Do whatever you can do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm somebody who, in my younger days when I was single, go to a protest. What does it matter if I got arrested? You have the number written on your arm, you get out, you went on with your day. I have 2 small children, and a lot more responsibilities. I'm not at that age where that's a viable option to me. I'm probably more likely to make a donation.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to give in other ways. What excites me about life is at some point the kids will grow up, and maybe I can be like Jane Fonda, like maybe I could be in my 80s, and I go, you know what? I can get arrested again. Let's go.
Yeah.
So, but you just have to respect where you are and what you could do. It's much like your body. Like there's the story of who you are and what you're capable of changes.
Oh, that's such a great way of tying that into this, because it's so real. Like, how do you do this but still care about your own physical being?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
And
really good.
And you have to, and it's not selfish. I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, college, there are a lot of things about the college experience that I think are really, really warped and destructive. Among them was the all-nighter. Like, I just remember people in college being so proud of themselves about how little sleep they could function on. And I was up all night doing X, Y, and Z. And so many of us carry that as a point of pride, as a measure of our self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
And you could beat yourself up the rest of your life with this. And it's so destructive. And yet we hold on to it because when we were younger, it didn't penalize us as much as it will penalize us as we grow older.
Yeah.
And suddenly you find people who can't let it go because they've defined themselves. I have friends, I love them. And they'll say to me, well, I'm just somebody who doesn't need a lot of sleep. And I go, that's not true. It's not true. I mean, everybody's like, could you imagine being like, I'm not somebody who needs a lot of oxygen.
I don't need to breathe all the time.
I don't do anything. Right? Like, it's like, no, you're a human being. You actually need rest. But there's a whole sort of, people have tied their identity. They're telling you what kind of person they are. And that's always the thing that's very hard for people to give up. When it's suddenly wrapped up in their identity, good luck.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Yeah. That brings a lot of light to a lot of interactions I've had over the years. Tell me, so you have 2 kids. Are they little boys or girls, or?
I have a little girl and a little boy.
Okay, that's cool. That's really cool. What are some main things that you try, I guess, to teach your kids when it comes to this stuff, like at these early ages? Like, how do you show this to them in their version?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we have a book. I'm trying to think of the name of it, and it's escaping me, and I can see the cover. Maybe it'll come to me later. But it's a book about the Black experience and in America. And it says at one point there's a page of a Black family, like the 1930s, very formal dress, and it says, this is for those who survived America. And then you turn the page, and the page is blank, and it says, and this is for those who didn't.
Oh.
And we've talked a lot about what that blank page means. That that sometimes bad things happen to good people, and you're trying to introduce the idea that there isn't that we're not living in a fairy tale where everything works out. You're trying not to be too heavy on them, but I mean, like, we've already talked to the same book. There's a picture of a slave ship, and we've talked about slavery, and it was like, well, a long time, not so, well, it's actually it's like not so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, a lot of white people thought Black people weren't human. They were wrong. And they thought they could own them like livestock, and they were wrong. You, with children, oftentimes, what we've learned is you answer the question they're asking. You don't have to dig much further because they're asking you to the edge of their understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't want to overwhelm them. And so you try to just sort of meet them where they are at that particular moment.
Yeah.
But we absolutely felt like you've got to raise them in the reality of where we are. I mean, the pandemic did that. Why do I have to wear this mask? The point was like, because you could catch coronavirus. At the time, you're saying there's no cure for it, there's no protection, and it hits people very differently. And maybe you could be a little sick, but maybe you could be a lot sick, and maybe you could die. We don't want that. So we're going to wear this mask, okay?
Mm.
Yeah. By the way, parenting in every age is always such a big gamble because you are doing something day in and day out. I'm not going to have really any sense of whether or not what I did was right or wrong, or it stuck or it didn't, for 20 years, 30 years, depending on how they developed and they reflect on it. So I'm always, whenever talking about parenting advice, I'm always like, this is my best guess. Check back in later. I'll tell you how.
Oh man. Well, I don't have kids. And so I'm always so curious about what are the best ways to, like you're saying, like not be too heavy and overwhelm them and say things they don't understand yet, or don't need to understand yet, but with being honest with them and telling them the truth and stuff. And
you answer the question in front of you. And that's really the best. That's all. That's what because sometimes they'll ask it and then they'll just go back to playing.
Okay, cool.
They just want to know that one thing, and then they're all right.
Okay, that's very cool. That's very cool that you're honest with them.
I know what I mean. I have, you are doing a reverse playbook when you're raising a kid. You're examining what you liked and didn't like in your own upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want it to be honest.
Okay, that's very cool. That's very cool. Rasheed, I have like one or two more questions for you today. Is that okay?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Cool. So my first one is what are some techniques that you have, some ways that help you on a hard day, or maybe a day where like I know I've experienced this, where you take in like a lot of hard information and it just feels heavy. How are ways that you connect with yourself and you take care of yourself and your body to combat those moments?
Sometimes I meditate. More often than not, I like to walk around my neighborhood at night. I like the stars. I like the moon. I like the cool air. I love architecture. I love seeing houses all lit up in a row. And so walking tends to soothe me a lot. I, for better or worse, tend to be pretty good at throwing off pressure. Just at some point you stare at it, you go, there's nothing I can do. There's no more I can do. There's nothing else I can do about X, Y, and Z. So I might as well relax as much as I can. Hot baths are nice. Hot stone massages are nice.
Oh, I want one.
But also just like, if you can, going to a play, anything that can lift me out of the reality when I'm really stressed is welcome.
Okay. Is that a big reason why you like film and TV shows so much? Why you got involved in all that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm an escape art. I mean, like people are like, oh, how did you write this book during a pandemic? And I was like, well, okay, so I could stay consciously plugged into a world beyond my control, or I could disconnect and work on a world in which I was in complete control. You know, of course I'm going to write.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so my last question for you has nothing to do with anything. If you've listened to a couple episodes, you probably know where I'm going with this. Rasheed, would you rather be the coach of a football team where all the players were guinea pigs and they all took the sport very seriously, very, very seriously? Their parents were like all at the games. They were really invested, but they just weren't very good at it. But they were all very sweet and kind to you. Like they loved you. They looked up to you. They don't care about football. They want to please you. They want to please their parents, and they're just having a good time. They're just guinea pigs running around. Or would you rather have a job as a captain of a pirate ship, but it's a good pirate ship? So it's not a pirate ship that goes and steals stuff. It's just a pirate ship that goes around and just has a good time, maybe does some good now and then, but also just has a good time. And your job is to be the captain. So you're running the crew. They're just doing whatever it is crews of pirate ships do that don't involve stealing money and stuff, unless it's from really bad people. Yeah, and this is your job, and not a lot of people understand it, but it's what you do, and you're proud of it.
I mean, the pirate ship sounds like show business, so that's the job. That's the job. I'm TJ and I are co-showrunners. I don't think most people know what that means. And what it entails. It is a pirate ship. I mean, I always, Hollywood is a collection of runaways.
Oh.
It's just people who left their hometown for this, that. I mean, so, back in the old days, you ran from home, you might have joined the pirate ship, the Merchant Marines. Well, they joined Hollywood. They're wildly talented. They're incredibly unorthodox. We are together. We call it a crew. We're together for a brief period of time. Sometimes that's meaningful. Sometimes that's you make lifelong friends. Sometimes it's mercenary. Sometimes you don't like them, they don't like you. We're here to do this job. We're going to do it, and when it's done, we're done. All that is on the table.
I love it,
but we know it. So yeah, I think I am the captain of a pirate ship.
Makes sense to me. Makes a lot of sense to me. I would have picked that one too, but more so just because got really into the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. So all the reasons. That's awesome. Rasheed, thank you so much for being so kind and generous with your time today and answering. Yeah, absolutely. How can people find you and your work?
On Instagram, I'm at rasheed.newson.author. And on Twitter, I'm at Rasheed Newson.
Okay. And then what are the shows that you're
I'm currently the co-showrunner of Bel Air, which airs on Peacock. You can go there now and watch our entire first season. We are working on season 2, which will come out in early 2023.
Oh, I'm so excited. I've heard about it and I haven't gotten to sit down and watch it, so now I'm going to. I'm excited. Absolutely. Are you planning, this is kind of random, but are you planning on writing more books in the future, or you kind of don't know?
Oh yeah, no. Oh yeah, no. I'm right now writing one. I want to do a story set in Hollywood. Oh. So that's my current baby.
Okay, you're an incredible writer, so I'm excited for it. So
thank you.
Absolutely. Congratulations on all the things that you've been a part of, and I'm just so honored to be able to talk to you, and I'm going to go learn a lot of things now because I have a lot more questions.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, you take care, okay?
All right, bye-bye.